Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the very first pre-release on Fontaine characters. Today, we're going to be going over Freminet's kit, so let's just get right into it. Relatively high-ish base HP, a little bit on the upper side for 4 stars. Same thing for base defense. Base attack, kind of whatever. Attack percent Ascension. As we're going to see later, Freminet is an on-field unit, and so having those relatively high base defensive stats will mean that he's not going to feel too fragile when he's on field. Attack percent Ascension is a tiny bit unfortunate because generally there's other stats that could be better, but it is what it is, and that's okay. Let's quickly go through his kit. So first things first, there's the normal attacks, and the normal attacks are actually going to matter because, as we're going to see later, he's kind of has more than one way you can play him, but one of those ways is as a physical carry, and he will be using his normal attacks. So 1 hit damage is 154.8%. This is at talent level 9. 2 hit, 148.2. 3 hit, 187.2. 4 hit, 227.5. He is a Claymore user. His attacks are not like that fast. All in all, these are kind of average normal attacks for how fast his animations are. They're kind of just whatever. His E though, his E is where the magic lies. Before we get into his E, I want to get this out of the way. He is not going to be good. His numbers just ain't it, Chief. And that's okay. Honestly, if I were to compare him to anyone, I think the closest character that I would compare him to is Dea. In the sense that, just like Dea, I think that his kit is actually really interesting, but he's so omega bad that most people won't really get to experience it. However, unlike Dea, his kit can lend itself to some Hyperbloom teams. And because Hyperbloom teams have a strong 3-unit core, generally, then he might not feel as bad to play. In any case, let's get into his E. Does an upward thrust that will deal cryo damage and cause Freminet to enter per time for 10 seconds. While this is active, his elemental skill will turn into Shattering Pressure. Shattering Pressure executes different sorts of attacks based on the pressure level, and then cancels per time. Oh, it's timer, sorry. Level 0 unleashes a vertical cut that will deal cryo damage. Levels 1 to 3 unleashes a vertical cut alongside dealing cryo damage and physical damage. Level 4 borrows the power of a fully pressurized pipe to deal physical damage. Meanwhile, normal attacks will be replaced by Shattering Pressure. There's a lot of words. Don't worry, I'll summarize it after that. Path timer. When Freminet uses normal attacks, he will also unleash waves of frost that deal cryo damage and increase Path's pressure level. The accompanying cryo damage dealt this way is considered skill damage. Arca Pneuma. At certain intervals, after using the upward thrust, a Spirit Breath Thorn in the form of another upward thrust will be created, dealing Pneuma-aligned cryo damage. So that's a lot of words, right? Let's start with the last part. At certain intervals, which is 9 seconds, and which does not scale with talent level, you deal a very small amount of cryo damage. And it's Pneuma-aligned cryo damage. So Fontaine is introducing a new mechanic where your damage can have an alignment, which is either Pneuma or Uja. I believe in 4.0, the only Uja character that we are getting is Lynette, who from what I understand will be given for free. Basically, think of it this way. When you're against, say, the Aeon Blight Drake, right? You need to hit its thingy when it's in the air. You need to hit its wings, right? To bring it down. Well, in order to do that, you'll need an attack that hits up. When you're against Simon, you need either Quicken to make it reappear and stun it, or Electro to react with its second invisible phase to make it reappear faster. This is just a new dimension to that, where some enemies are going to have weaknesses to alignments, where if you hit them with an attack that has an alignment, it will debuff them or cancel one of their attacks in a certain way. I'm not a big fan of this mechanic because it feels like a very artificial way to incentivize people to pull for the Fontaine characters. If it's implemented well, I don't have an inherent problem with it, but it's a gacha game, so they're obviously going to value profits over balance, and so I'm not too excited about it. But it definitely could be, theoretically, an interesting mechanic. It's just, yeah. Anyways, this isn't really that relevant. It is going to mean that if you use him on your teams, you have that way of dealing with the boss's mechanic or the normal enemy's mechanic, depending on how they end up doing it. But he's not the only one who has it, and we're gonna hope that it's not very necessary. But that's obviously gonna potentially change with new enemies in 4.1, 4.2, so it's really hard to speculate on how useful this is gonna be. Next up, we have the actual skill itself, which is basically you use your E, it deals some damage, and it gives you a buff. And you can then reuse your E, right? A bit like Kutsing. You can use your E and then you can reuse your E, but it still goes on cooldown from the first one. And then if you reuse it immediately, it'll deal cryo damage, and if instead you keep normal attacking after using your E, then it will transform its cryo damage into physical damage. His burst, Shadow Hunter's Ambush, unleashes a wave of untouchable cold, dealing AoE cryo damage, resetting the cooldown of his skill, and causing Freminet to enter the Subnautical Hunter mode for 10 seconds. While in the Subnautical Hunter mode, his interruption resistance will increase, and Pressurized Flow, his elemental skill, will obtain the following buffs. Cooldown decreased by 70%, and normal attacks will give one more stack, which means that you're going to get 2 stacks per normal attack instead of 1. And the cryo damage that you deal along with your normal attacks while in his buffed state will be doubled. Now, the cryo damage that you're dealing is dog shit, so it doesn't matter that it's doubled. But let's boil this down to how he's going to end up working. The base cooldown on his skill is 10 seconds, which means you can't really spam it. But when you're in his burst, the cooldown goes to 3 seconds, which means you can spam it. So basically, he's going to be used with some attack strings that are going to try to make him use his E as often as possible. Now, he also has an Ascension talent, which is so well designed and that I really love. When using Pressurized Flow Shattering Pressure, which is his E, if the amount of stacks is less than 4, the cooldown will be decreased. In other words, you have 2 main ways you can play him. You can play him as a physical carry, where you build around getting to 4 stacks, and you do something like E, 4 normal attacks, E, burst, E, N2E, E, N2E, or E, N2E, N1, whatever. Some form of combo where you try to maximize the amount of level 4 Shattering Pressure damage that you get while weaving in normal attacks. And your other option is you can build him as a cryo carry, where you don't use your normal attacks, and instead you just spam your E and get this thing, right, this damage, and that is going to make it so that your E has a cooldown of 2 seconds instead of 3. I really like this design. I think this is such an interesting way of designing a character, where you give them more than one way they can be played, but in a way that actually feels like it makes sense. Finally, his other Ascension passive. When Freminet triggers Shatter against opponents, the damage dealt by his elemental skill will be increased by 40% for 5 seconds. So basically, when you're against freezable enemies, if you are playing him in a team where there's a Hydro unit, his E will deal a decent amount more damage. Here's the problem. As of the current version of the game, there are not a lot of units that synergize well with Physical. Physical doesn't have good supports, and so many of the units that are kind of good in Physical teams, that you can use in Physical teams, you're sacrificing a lot of their power to play them in Physical team. So for example, when you're playing Fischl in a Physical team, you're not getting VV for Fischl, you're not getting Kazuha damage percent for Fischl, you're not getting a lot of A4 procs on Fischl, you're not getting Quicken. There's so many things that you're not getting, which makes those units do a lot less than they would in other teams. We don't have off-field physical damage dealers, and so because of that, if you want a physical unit to be good, they need to have really high numbers. Freminet's numbers are shit. They're not very good. 400% seems high, but the thing is, he doesn't get it often enough, basically. It doesn't happen on every attack. It's like every few attacks. And when you actually look at what his strings look like and what his output looks like, it's just incredibly underwhelming. At the end of the day, he has an incredibly cool kit, but I don't think they want him to be that good. Now, if you decide to go for a melt build instead, it is going to be doable with just E-spam, no normal attacks, but from what I've heard, his E-spam, it feels pretty clunky because the cooldown is just long enough that you kind of feel like you're not doing anything. Right, with the 2 seconds, you use your E and then you reactivate it for the level 0 thing, and then you kind of got like a second where you're just waiting and not doing anything. I do think that that's going to be the way to play him that is going to make his kit shine the most on release, but I still don't think it's going to be a particularly good team, and I don't really see him being better than a character like Rosario or Kea, who do their damage even after you swap them out in those melt teams. Let's look at his Constellations. Increased crit rate on skill, which is nice. More energy on skill, which is whatever, because it's a very small amount of energy. Normal attack levels, which is very interesting. He is the first character that gets normal attack levels on Constellations instead of skill and burst, right? So C3 is normal attack, C5 is skill, which means he doesn't get burst levels. And because his burst levels don't really do much, to just increase the initial hit on his burst, then that's actually fairly nice for him. But it is not ideal if you are intending on playing him in a melt team, because you're not using his normal attacks at all. Because if you do use his normal attacks, well, you're gonna get some stacks, and the stacks make it so you do less cryo damage and you do physical damage instead, which is not what you want. C4, when he triggers Frozen, Shatter, or Superconduct, his attack is increased by 9% up to 2 stacks, which is 18% attack, which is whatever. And then C6, when you trigger Frozen, Shatter, or Superconduct, crit damage will be increased by 12% up to 3 stacks, which is 36% crit damage, which is a little bit more. All in all, his cons are very much centered around his playstyle in physical teams, like as a physical carry. And that's kind of But yeah, so now that we've, covered the basic kit, let's do what we do with every single pre-release and go through how you're going to want to build him. Okay, so these are all the weapons that you would generally consider for him in a physical team. Generally, his best weapon is gonna be Bacon, but Pines, if the attack speed lines up well enough to get you more attacks, then Pines can be better than Bacon. Red Horn isn't far behind, and this might be a little bit surprising to some of you guys, but Scoured Pride is actually also a very competitive option on him. And the main reason is because his numbers are so bad that Scoured Pride's 80% motion value 8 times, that's 640% motion value you get from all the waves, is actually a better passive than basically all of the other passives. And so at that point, what can hold it back is the fact that it gives ER substat, which means that depending on the team that you're using him in, if you're generating a lot of energy, then Scoured Pride's ER is kind of useless. But if you're not, then the ER makes you, or lets you go for more attack and more crit on your substats, which can actually make Scoured Pride his best weapon in some teams. If that doesn't show you how shit he is, I don't know what will. Unfortunate Wolves or whatever. Serpent Spine, as usual, especially at high refine, is going to be a good stat stick. But again, right, for the same reason why Scoured Pride is a competitive option with his other 5-star options, Prototype Archaic and Snow Tomb Star Silver are not that far behind the 5 stars because they give you motion value, and his numbers are just so shit. If you're getting hits on the enemy while they're affected by cryo with Snow Tomb Star Silver, and you get the 200% proc instead of the 80% or the 360 at R5, it's a 10-second cooldown, so you can get 2 per rotation. If you do get it like as well as you can, it's actually only a little bit behind the 5-star options, which makes it just overall a fairly strong option. But in a lot of teams, you're not going to want to play multiple cryo units with him, and his cryo application isn't the best, so it's a little bit iffy. And we have the new craftable claymore that's coming, the Tidal Shadow, which makes it that when the wielder is healed, you gain 24% attack for 8 seconds. At R5 it's 48%, and because it's more reliable and because it's just so much attack, I think that I would probably go for this one out of any of the craftables. But if you already have a high refine archaic, I wouldn't bother crafting this. And so, to give like a summary, right? Bacon is a best in slot contender. Red Horn, also Pines and Scoured Pride. Then Unforged and Wolves are solid stat stick. Snow Tombed, sometimes best in slot 4-star. Well, no, not best in slot, but best in slot free to play. Serpent Spine is generally going to be best in slot 4-star. Tidal Shadow, other times best in slot free to play. Prototype Archaic, fine option. If I were to rank them, I would probably group all the best in slot contenders together. It's hard to predict with Pines. I haven't seen any footage with Pines of how his attacks end up lining up, but I'm gonna assume that they line up fine and you get enough value out of the attack speed to make it best. And you are getting the buff to the team, and because his damage is so shit, the buff to the team is probably enough by itself to just make it his best weapon. I would probably put Scour Pride second just because it's going to be the most comfortable option, but realistically, they're both fine. One of the reasons why Redhorn is competitive with Bacon is because, again, his numbers are so shit that Redhorn's damage based on a percentage of his defense actually starts mattering. After that, I'd probably put Serpent Spine, then the 5-star stat sticks, and then your free-to-play options, which with probably Tidal Shadow as the general best one. If you end up playing him in Melt teams, his elemental skill has standard ICD that is shared between the skill hits. I don't know if I'm closer to bursting out laughing or crying right now. If you end up playing him in one of those teams, you can use something like Mailed Flower. Getting some EM is nice, but his ICD being dog shit for Melt is just so bad. It's so bad. It's so fucking terrible. I don't know how or why this happened. This is fine. Alright, artifact sets. He's a skill spammer physical carry, so it's fairly straightforward what artifact set you're gonna want to go, right? You want to go 4-piece Pale Flame, best in slot physical, and honestly, you can go 2-piece, 2-piece, but very coat. You get a lot of stats out of 4-piece Pale Flame, so it's just worth getting if you want to main him for some godforsaken reason. You can also, if you end up playing him in Melt, you can play him on like 4-piece Lava Walker, good in Rev Melt. You can play him on 4-piece, the upcoming Golden Troop set, fine in Rev Melt. Artifact stats, you're looking for attack, physical, crit, which is your best in slot. Obviously, attack, cryo, crit, best in slot in Melt. And you can play attack, crit, which is fine if low attack. So if you're playing something like Serpent Spine where you stack a lot of damage percent and you don't want to use Noblesse on your team, you don't have that many attack percent subs, then going attack Goblet can be a fine option, but it's generally still not going to be as much damage as a physical Goblet. It's just it gives you the option to have more versatility in your artifact, so it isn't something that you should completely dismiss, but it's definitely not what you want to be going for. And finally, his teams, Hyper Carry, very bad. If you're trying to play him as a hyper carry, you will not have a good time. If you have his C6 and like a 5-star weapon for him, he's basically gonna feel like carry Dea. It's not looking good on that front. What he has going for him is that all of his synergies are with Electro and Hydro, and like I mentioned earlier, Hyper Bloom teams, right? They already run Electro and Hydro, and very often you don't really have like a specific last slot that you need to use, so you can use him in Hyper Bloom teams to play some weird Hyper Fridge bullshit where you don't really get Hyper Fridge because you're just gonna shatter your freeze immediately. So I'm not gonna call it Hyper Fridge because it isn't really Hyper Fridge. You're not keeping the enemy frozen. It's just Hyper Bloom. It's probably gonna be his general best team, but he is not a great choice for it. So I'm just gonna say it's like okay. And then Melt, I'm gonna say it's a Bromogus. God, I don't. Why did they make it so that all of his different E's share ICD? Why would they do that? Oh, you know what? I forgot an artifact set. 4-piece Thundering Fury. It's Smile. So his kit is funny, and it's gonna be even funnier with Thundering Fury. So I'm gonna be playing him with Thundering Fury for sure. I don't think you should. I don't think it's gonna be good, but I definitely will. Honestly, that kind of does it. I don't really see him being all that good in other teams. Like you could try to play him with freeze teams, but then you're just making your freeze team worse by using him. This is kind of what all of his teams are gonna boil down to. I really wish Hoyoverse didn't hate fun, but they do. And so as such, Freminet is not gonna be very good, but I will still be rolling for him, and I will still be playing him and hating myself, so hey, you should tune in for that. You can look forward to the other pre-releases. I started with Freminet because I think that his kit is the coolest of the three. Well, I guess 4 if you include Hydro MC. His kit is the coolest of the 4, and he is also probably the weakest of the 4. So you can look forward to some less shit characters for the next pre-releases. But that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope if you want to go for Freminet, you're willing to go through the kind of pain that you should be expecting. I hope they buff him, man. I really do, but God, I'm not holding out much hope. That's gonna be it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, YouTube.